Tonight, on Closer Look, Russell Colwell was arrested 37 years ago for the brutal murder of a grade 9 Sault Ste. Marie High School student in the washroom at Cora Collegiate. Now he's won the fight to see the outside of prison, leaving the family members and former prosecutor turned judge both angry and shattered. Village Media editor-in-chief Michael Friscolanti has covered this story for years and joins us tonight from Sault Ste. Marie. Michael, let's start by going back to that fateful day in 1987. Walk us through the chain of events that ultimately led to the death of 14-year-old Patrizia Mastroianni.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Tragically, this remains one of the worst crimes in the city's history. Almost unthinkable when you actually try to grasp the details. It was October 1987, high school in the west end of the city, normal school day, and a young girl, grade 9 student, Patrizia Mastroianni, went to the bathroom, and there was someone stalking the high school, a former student, looking to sexually assault a young girl. And in this particular case, it was quick. She was cornered in the bathroom and she was tragically killed. And I just can't even put into words what a shock it was for the community and how it remains that so many years later. But to have this happen in a high school in the middle of the day, it's just unimaginable. And you can imagine the shock that it sent through the community and obviously through this young girl's family.
No question. Now, Michael, the parole board cited Colwell's rehabilitation and minimal public risk as factors for granting the escorted temporary absence. Based on what you know and have reported on, what evidence did they present to support this conclusion?
So this is where this story is kind of always lingered as a story here in the Soo, right? Russell was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. And in Canada, that means you are given a life sentence. Even if you get out on parole, you're under some conditions of the parole laws that you still have to report to someone. You're never a 100% free person if you're sentenced to life. So in this case, Russell applied for full parole a few years ago after the 25-year mark passed. He was denied. He applied for day parole and was denied. But recently, his tactic is to apply for something called a temporary escorted absence, which allows him to leave prison under the watchful eye of some kind of supervisor. And what's happened here, Scott, is this young girl's family, who have dealt with this tragedy for 37 years and have seen just the immeasurable ways it's impacted their life and changed their lives forever, have really fought hard. They've been forced to fight hard to keep him in prison. They don't think he even deserves that. And a lot of people feel the same. And so at every turn when he applies for parole, they have fought those applications. And in this particular case, last year, they had to go to the prison where he was in Kingston, attend the parole hearing. He was not granted this temporary escorted absence. And then he appealed the ruling. And then he was given a new hearing. And in this case, a couple of weeks ago, actually won this temporary escorted absence. Basically, the parole board has to weigh two things, Scott. They have to decide whether this person presents a risk to society, balancing that against their eventual goal of reintegrating this person into society. And they felt, in a nutshell, that allowing him this temporary escorted absence is kind of a first step, like a small first step to getting him reintegrated into society. But you can imagine how that made the family feel. I can tell you that more than 100 people in the community wrote letters to the parole board voicing their concerns, talking about how this crime impacted their lives and how they didn't want this to happen. Unfortunately for the family, the parole board decided otherwise.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec, Michael. The victim's family expressing strong opposition to Colwell's release, citing concerns about his continued danger. How has their perspective been factored into the parole board's deliberations, if at all?
Yeah, this is where the system can be frustrating for victims, and this is well known to people who've navigated the system. Like I said, the parole board will listen to those concerns, and they did. Both sisters, Tiziana Palumbo and Carmela Rosnick, both appeared at the parole board and gave powerful statements to how this has impacted their lives. But ultimately, it's not a huge factor in what the parole board decides. They're trying to decide that fine line between, is this person a risk to society under these circumstances, versus how do we help this person reintegrate into society? So to answer your question, Scott, not a lot. It's not really a huge part of what they go through, because if it was a big factor, this person would never see the outside of prison, because this family has fought at every turn, and like I said, been forced to fight at every turn, because he's been applying for these parole applications.
The prosecutor in the case was Norm Douglas, who went on to become an Ontario Court of Justice judge and was in the courtroom when the ruling came down with the family, and he had some very strong words.
Yeah, this is an interesting part of this story too. Norm was the Crown Attorney at the time of the crime and prosecuted the case. It was him that was the Crown Attorney when Russell Colwell was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Many years later, and as he explained to us, he grew close to the family at the time. Right? Imagine prosecuting a case like this. He had young children, very emotional to do this, and was a real advocate for the family back in those days, explaining to them what was happening, and they became close. They reunited in recent years. They met each other, and Norm, who's, like you said, went on to become a judge and is now retired, has really become an advocate for them again. And so he accompanied them to the last parole hearing, where this temporary absence was granted. He was not given standing to speak, so he was there more as support. He didn't actually speak, but he did write a column for Sault Today afterwards, just expressing his disgust that this person is going to see the outside of prison. And he believes in cases like this. Again, this is a person who sexually assaulted and killed a 14-year-old girl. Where's the rehabilitation in that is their question. How can a person like that ever see the outside of prison? So he's been very vocal on that, has been a big support for the family. And now the question is, what are the next steps? What's going to happen next? This temporary escorted absence is going to happen. Is the next step he's going to apply for day parole, which will involve a whole other round of travel for the family to fight this case.
Michael, you mentioned that the judge and Patrizia's two sisters hadn't seen each other for some time, and then had a chance meeting at a book signing. Can you walk us through what that experience was like for the three of them?
Yeah, Norm has written a book called "You Be the Judge," which has been pretty well publicized. He's been written about a lot in the Canadian media. A sort of an inside look at what it was like to be a judge and the difficult decisions. And he was actually doing a book signing here in Sault Ste. Marie. And the sisters had actually just returned last year from a parole hearing and went to the book signing, and they reunited, and there was a lot of tears shed, just a lot of emotions in seeing Norm all these years later. And it was powerful for all of them, and especially for him, and which is why he is taking it upon himself to be a big advocate for the family going forward.
Village Media Editor-in-Chief Michael Friscolanti on tonight's Closer Look.